Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Hi, red.olaughlin here. We're on the Wise Ones program, and I am super honored. It's rare I have a chance to have another host from the USA Global TV and Radio Network today on the show at all, but today just happens to be one of those days. And TRACY CRAM PERKINS, I've been on other shows with her. We've talked back and forth, and we were on one recently. I said, "Hey Tracy, why don't you join me on my show?" And anyway, she is an expert beyond being an expert. Some people are experts because they went to school, got their degree, some because they experienced. Well, she has an expert because it's personal, it's something she's experienced, and she's willing to share what works and what doesn't work on something that really and truly is extremely important to all of us, and that's dementia. You have somebody, a loved one, a relative, a sibling. What do you do right and what do you do wrong in order to make your life and their life better? So, Tracy, please join me.
Well, hello, and thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Red. I really appreciate that.
Why don't we start a little bit about Tracy CRAM PERKINS before she was an author, before she had dementia even in her vocabulary. Um, Give us some highlights, 1-2 minutes of where you came from, and then we'll get into what developed that caused your book to be written.
Well, I think of myself as an ordinary mortal. I was just living life, working. My husband and I have a small business together that has nothing to do with dementia. We'd been working together for a number of years, and it was just kind of a shock to, going back in time. It was great to have a job working with my husband and just living life and not having any responsibilities beyond, the things that I set out for myself. Spend time with the family, just, we would travel, we would do all these things. It became obvious later, and I guess I'm not really talking a couple minutes here, but it became obvious later that my parents were getting to the point where they couldn't take care of themselves. And so they had retired and my mom had developed cancer. And as far as we knew, the treatment and everything was going fine. They had expected her to last for a certain amount of time, and she actually lived beyond that. But she didn't have a really good quality of life, and we didn't realize that this was happening. None of us lived close. We lived close by, but not that close. Like I was an hour away at the time, and the rest of my family was around the area, and my parents didn't tell us that things were going wrong. We would just notice at family gatherings that it was different. She wasn't talking as much. She wasn't participating. She wasn't as lively as she used to be, which is expected when somebody is recovering from cancer. What we didn't realize is that she had dementia. And so it came a point where one day my younger sister called me at work and said, "Hey, we've got a problem. Dad said he can't take care of mom anymore, and we need to have a family meeting." And we came down, and my dad was falling asleep at the table. And my mom could not rise to the occasion with us there, and she had slowly been declining as it was. So we weren't sure what this meant, and it turned out that she needed palliative care, and she needed it right away. And so we ended up getting palliative care, not understanding what that was because she was at end of life. We didn't know how long she'd last, but she wasn't close enough to actually be applicable for hospice. So and we, my husband and I moved closer. And then once we went, oh gosh, once we realized that she couldn't talk that much anymore, I started reading to her every day, and I picked out the series of books that I knew she had read and loved, and it got her talking again. And the beauty of this was that I ended up being able to have conversations with my mom about other things that weren't necessarily healthy in our relationship. And what ended up happening is we could talk about it, get it out in the open, and then she would completely forget. And I was the one having the healing, and she wasn't having any anxiety. And so it was a really lovely experience for both of us. What I didn't know is my dad had Alzheimer's disease already. And so whenever I would have these talks with my mom, his anxiety level would go up and up and up when I would drive him back to his apartment. And he would be freaking out that my mom would be coming home and he'd have to start caring for her again, which was unrealistic. But I was too young to understand at the time that this was dementia. So that's where it started.
Okay, how old were you when your mom had cancer?
41.
Okay, and then the end result of the treatments, she survived those and somewhere in between transitioned into dementia on top of being a cancer survivor. How old were you then for that phase?
Oh gosh. Oh, I take it back. I was 41 when I was started taking my dad. So I was probably in my late 30s. And when we discovered that she had post-operative cognitive decline, it was anesthesia dementia because she was at that age, because I think she was 70 years old or 71 when she had the first surgery, and it took out her esophagus. And so it was a difficult transition because then of course her stomach was sewn to her throat, and trying to deal with the rehab when you're over 70 and you're not in the best of health, it was challenging.
Okay, so you had a parent who is in their 70s, and this, whether you're 31 or 41,
Mhm.
doesn't matter. We have parents that can have medical issues, and they generally start appearing after 60, 65, and you get into their 70s. And from a statistical perspective, if you make 70, you make 80. That's because so many people die before they make 70, and that's how that balances that equation out. But so your mother transitioned into being a cancer survivor to coming down with some type of dementia caused by anesthesia, or doesn't matter the cause, she had it. And your dad recognized it, and you were not living with your parents at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So when you have a situation like that, it's hard to really and truly keep active tabs on. So let me start out the first question. How did you find out, or how did you first discover that there may be a mental cognitive issue with your mom?
Well, she was forgetting things, and my mother had an elephantine memory where she was an interior designer, and she could remember every room she had ever been in. She could describe people's houses to a T. So it was a really phenomenal trick that she had, and she had just this incredible memory. So when she started losing things, that was kind of mind-boggling to us because we were so surprised because she had been so sharp for so long, and that this was disappearing. But we were putting it off to exhaustion. We were putting it off to cancer treatment. We were all of these things, and age. We were just because we didn't know what to look for. So that's really where we started.
Okay, so people as they get older have a tendency to forget things. Where did the keys go? Where did I leave that? And so that sometimes can be a little confusing because old age, those are some of the symptoms of old age, but the symptoms of dementia also kind of mimic those in many regards. It's like uh, vitamin B12 deficiency mimics Alzheimer's. And a lot of gerontologists will give you a B12 shot, and if that takes care of it, thank you very much, end of story. But if it's not, then you have problems. So your mom went through this dementia thing. How long did that dementia take for her before when you discovered it to when she was actually being taken care of in a home?
Okay, so she was living, I would say independently, but with assistance for 5 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
then it was definitely we needed assistance for the next 2 years because my dad could not do it by himself. And we, all of us kids were working. And so it was just a challenge trying to coordinate things that could help them during the day. And we had in-home help. But at year 6 is when the stuff hit the fan, and we all had that meeting and realized that, okay, this has gone way farther than we thought, and ended up contacting, hospice, and they got her into palliative care in that group home. So,
Okay, so now your dad is home by himself during all this 5, 6 year period of time and
mhm.
functioning well. When did you start noticing a dementia potential with him?
Well, that was very interesting. We didn't really notice anything until he came to confess at my house. We were having a family birthday party, and he said he was in trouble. Now, my dad had been independent for many, many years, and so we didn't understand what it meant when he said he was in trouble. Well, because of he was free, he had spent all of his life savings. He had wasn't paying for anything and was being evicted. So we had to step in and bail him out, basically. And so my siblings and I got together, and my younger sister is a financial whiz. She was able to get him out of the financial difficulty. It took us about 18 months to get everything paid down and off and taken care of. And then he ended up moving into basically a subsidized housing because that's all he could afford on his Social Security, since that was the only income he had left. And then he started overdosing on aspirin because he was experiencing pain, didn't remember he had taken it. And so he was eating aspirin and eating aspirin and eating aspirin, which of course eats your stomach lining. And he had made a dinner, put it in the microwave, forgot he'd made the dinner, put a second one on the counter to go in the microwave, and was having a diabetic low and passed out. He was my younger sister, it was her night to do the wellness check. She found him unconscious in his apartment, got him to the hospital. Um, when he came to a week later from the coma, he was in moderate Alzheimer's disease. So, and this is where the journey really takes a twist because they would not let me take him home with me. This is why most families just put them right back in their home and let them go on with things as normal. And they don't realize that, okay, they need to step in and take over. My younger sister and I had a deal. I took care of our mother, so I had power of attorney for her. She took care of our dad. She had power of attorney for him. And then she didn't think that I would be able to handle the caregiving because she couldn't handle it. Now, we're very, very close in age and very, very similar. However, I am the older sister, and so there's certain things I will do that she won't. So it just worked out that he ended up being uh, absconded into the system, and they put him in a group home where he was the only ambulatory person. And he didn't feel like there was anything wrong with him because that's part of the magic of dementia, that disguises itself as anything else. And so he wanted to go for a walk. And of course, there's only 2 staff members usually at any one time in a group home for 6 patients. And so he would go for a walk whenever their backs were turned, which does not play well. And my family didn't understand, and myself included, that we were part of the problem and we were a big part of it. And we were upset with the staff because he was having these issues. So the physician that was assigned to that group home was giving my dad medications to make him behave. And instead of interacting with him like a normal person would behave, it made him hyperactive. It gave him a hallucination. He threatened to kill his roommate. When that happened, they called the police. They sent him to a geriatric psych ward, but they would not tell us where he was. And my sisters, my aunt, and I all spent an evening calling every facility in 3 counties until we found him one county to the north. And that's only because we were butting heads with the staff. And hindsight being what it is, there's a lot of ways we could have handled that so much better and had a much better outcome. It was our fault.
Okay, why don't we go down that road? You had a power of attorney for your mom.
Mhm.
Is a simple power of attorney, or is it a medical power of attorney? What kind of power of attorney?
I had, let's see, I had 3 different versions. I had financial, I had, medical, and then I also had just general power of attorney. So in case my father wasn't available to do whatever it was, I could take over. And then,
Okay, so
'cause
from a
yeah,
perspective of somebody suspecting somebody has more than just some memory loss, when people are cogent, they can make decisions, they can sign checks, they can do whatever.
yeah,
At some point in time, deeds to houses, accounts, whatever, uh, probably need to be considered. Put me on that so that I can take care of the bills, I can take care of medicines, I can whatever may happen to be. So one of the first things that should be done is adding your name to whatever their property has, cars, whatever. Then also having the power of attorney to make decisions, even if the other spouse is alive, it's held in reserve. Is that a fair statement?
that is a fair statement.
Okay. So now your dad is in a situation where he can't control himself. How far away did you live and your sister live from him?
10 minutes in either direction.
Oh, wow.
We got really lucky with that particular group home. However, after the geriatric psych ward visit, social services again said that since I didn't have power of attorney, I couldn't have him. So that started a legal journey, which we got lucky and we got fast tracked on, but I'll explain that in a minute. So what ended up happening is he was sent to a skilled care facility, memory care facility, or actually skilled care facility lockdown section. So for the memory care. And he again asked if he could go for walks. They looked and saw that he was an elopement risk, and they said no. And so my younger sister and I, because we were the closest physically, would alternate days to take him for walks, but it wasn't enough. And so he would escape. And because he felt that he should be, he's an adult and he should be treated like one. So after 5 escape attempts, they said, we can't handle him, and they sent him to the next more secure facility. And we ended up going through 4 more facilities and 1 more visit to a geriatric psych ward before he got to the most secure facility. When he was there, and I have to hand it to my dad, it's 5 seemed to be the magic number before he get kicked out. Uh, he was on number 4 escape attempt, and he waited till his roommate went to physical therapy. He stayed in his pajamas and slippers. He noticed that there had been the screws in the windows, the plate glass windows were mounted incorrectly. And so he closed the door part way. He unscrewed the screws, lifted the plate glass window out, climbed through the window, put it back in, and screwed them back in the way they were supposed to be screwed in, and then went for his walk. So there were no cameras facing the patient windows, and so they had no idea how he got out. So his little Houdini act landed well, he ended up going for a walk and ended up walking about 5 miles to the main highway that leads to the interstate. And he was, of course, because of his dementia, he wasn't paying attention to the traffic lights, and he walked across against the light in his pajamas and slippers across a 6-lane highway when there was traffic coming at him. And so people started calling 911. Where we got lucky is that the sheriff that came to pick him up, because by this time he was tired and he sat down on the railing leading into Interstate 5. He I love this man. He saw my dad. He said, "You look tired. Do you need a lift?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Have you ever been in a police car?" And my dad said, "No." And he goes, "Would you like to sit in the front seat with me and I'll explain it to you while I take you home?" And that's what they chatted about the whole way back. It was probably the best experience my dad had during that time. And when he got back to the facility, they asked him, "How did you get out?" And he gladly showed them and taught them how to fix it. It was the first time they treated him like a human being. And they've the maintenance people went through the entire facility and found that 30% of the windows had that problem, so they fixed them all. So in essence, he helped them with their security. But what they did do is they put a wristband on him, and anytime he would go near a window, they would start screaming. So yeah, he had 1 more escape after that before we finally got him.
Okay, you talk about security in the Alzheimer's wards. I have a couple relatives, father-in-law and brother-in-law, that had dementia, ended up in a situation like that. But one had, you had to have a key to get in, uh, and the other one, they would only allow themselves, the nurses, to take you in or out.
Mhm.
Uh, so is that kind of what you're talking about on a security? Is a locked door with keypad or something else?
Yes, it would be locked door with keypad. However, many of the facilities had guest codes next to the door.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
but they weren't at a spot because if you have dementia, you tend to when you get to the moderate stage or beyond, you tend to look at everything at about waist height. You get tunnel vision, and that's all you're going to see. So they had it put in an area where it would not be someplace that would attract attention. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't as far along in that part of his brain to be able to not problem solve, and he was a very gregarious man, very affable, and so by 3 or 4 days in, all the nurses would be giving him hugs because they just adored him. And he one day would notice that there's the keypad, and lo and behold, there's the code. Or he would be very gallant and he would say to women who were visiting, because there were also, it's just a standard skilled care facility, and then there's a lockdown part of it. They would, if he was coming back from lunch or something, because the lunchroom was in a different area that was not secured, and he would be escorted. But if the nurse was busy and he saw somebody that had just visited their husband, he would offer to walk them out to their car so they would be safe, so he could go for his walk.
Now, my dad had some dementia, but it was very short-lived.
Hmm.
I'm talking about a month or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It was crazy because we were driving, and my sister was actually driving in the car. We're taking my dad someplace to visit, and we get out, and my dad wanted to give that nice lady a tip who drove the car. Uh, and
Oh, wow.
we laugh about that now, but 2, 3 months later, he's back to being fairly normal. So sometimes you have these symptoms brought on by who knows what medicine. That's what we attribute it to.
Mhm.
That kind of disrupts that cognitive memory portion of the brain. And so just because you have it now doesn't necessarily mean you're going to keep it forever, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get worse. But I think we tend to always err on the part that it probably will get worse. Um, so your dad's transition uh, did get worse while he was in the facility. I'm guessing. At some
Mhm.
point in time, you brought him to your home.
Yes, actually, we were called. This all happened in a really short period of time, but we were called 2 days before Christmas. Now, social services had told us we would never be allowed to have him without power of attorney, and so 2 days before Christmas was the 23rd. I got the phone call from the facility saying we had 5 days to find someplace else for him to stay because he'd escaped the last time and they weren't going to deal with him anymore. Um, Within an hour or two, we had power of attorney. It was clearly meant to be. I mean, it was just very strange. But what ended up happening is we canceled Christmas because we were hosting the family, and we spent those 5 days trying to make our home into what we thought was dementia friendly, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
not.
this is the part, I guess, when you start. You have the book. You talk about a lot of things there. Let's assume for a moment that the dementia person, parent, sister, whatever, is living with you right now. What
Mhm.
are those things you look for to make the home dementia proof, for lack of a better word?
Well, I don't know if I could ever make it dementia proof, but the things I could do to make it easier to use the house would be removing area rugs because it's a tripping hazard. That'd be the easiest thing to do. Looking for if you've got electrical cords sticking out. And this would be just also for general people aging, is having cords where somebody could trip over them. It could be pictures hanging on the walls where they might slip and fall and grab them and the picture will fall on them. Uh, Also, making sure there's adequate lighting, that the flooring is level. If you've got someone with dementia, it cannot be a shiny floor. Now, I had and still have wood floors, and so we had to figure out how to dull them down because we discovered the hard way that glare can cause hallucinations. And especially in the early morning or the late afternoon when the sun would be coming through the windows at just the right angle, that's when we'd start having problems, and I didn't know why these reactions were happening. But having, shiny floors is another problem. Color. plays a huge component into dementia because as we age, and Red, I'm sure you're very aware of this, we have three different cones in our eyes that perceive color: red, blue, and green. The one that we have the least of is blue. So when our eyes start to, the lenses thicken, the eyes start to yellow a little bit, the blue starts to disappear. So we can only see the high level of contrast. So we can see black, white, and brightly contrasting colors. So if it was a bright blue or a bright red, we could see that. And there have been studies through Boston University from a researcher called Alice Cronin-Golem, who did studies with people with advanced Alzheimer's disease, getting them to continue feeding using bright red and bright blue cups and plates. And because dehydration is such an enormous issue with someone with dementia, they found that with the bright red or the bright blue cups, they could get them to drink up to 25% more fluids than they would without assistance.
Interesting. I read a story many years ago. I've written a lot on Alzheimer's, and one of the tests that was done was in an Alzheimer facility, 20, 22 people, something like that. They had them all sit down for a nice, really, really nice big Thanksgiving dinner. And they ate, I don't know what plates they had. They didn't even talk about colors, but they ate and were pretty much sated with whatever they had. They marched them down to the other side of the facility. They had the same turkey dinner, everything there. They sat down and they ate everything just like they did 15, 20, 30 minutes earlier. That we don't realize that we eat to where we're full, but the brain and the gut don't always talk to each other. And usually the gut says, hey, I'm full, stop. And there's a particular response for that. But it also, on the Alzheimer's, they can't remember when they ate. They're not hungry most of the time. And so there's issues there with getting them to drink, getting them to eat, and eat the right kinds of foods, because sometimes we'll give them cookies. Well, that's probably one of the things you don't want to do. But let's talk a little bit about feeding and drinks for somebody with dementia.
Well, okay, sweets should be limited, very limited, because eventually they'll get to the point where they only want to eat sugar. And obviously that because of the damage that's going to do to the pancreas, and I'm not a medical practitioner, but this is what I have learned through experience from my family being diabetics, is that once they damage their ability to process that insulin, then they're going to have extreme highs and extreme low blood sugar, and you can cause them to crash, and it will advance the Alzheimer's disease very quickly. So feeding them foods, what I ended up doing is I ended up having snacks that I didn't need to refrigerate on the kitchen counter, so that if my dad was walking by uh, and he saw it, he would nibble on that instead of eating candy. We had an issue with him where people were giving him bags of sugar-free candy. He overdosed on them, and so it gave flu-like symptoms, and we didn't know what was causing the flu-like symptoms. We thought maybe it was food poisoning. And you never know what they're going to put in their mouth when they get to a certain stage. So it's really playing detective with them. But eating nutritious meals, and then the other thing to think about is, I'll give an example from my own life. My mother-in-law also had Alzheimer's disease. My sister-in-law had these beautiful red plates that she served everyone on. We were having our hors d'oeuvres, and my mother-in-law was eating just fine. She had a few crackers and some snacks on the plate. We get to the dinner table, and my brother-in-law brought her a plate that had turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, and I don't remember, I think it was like green beans with onions or something like that. But it was all covered in gravy, so it all looked the same. And she sat there while the rest of us were eating, and she just sat there and started weeping and was shaking her head. Well, she couldn't communicate to us that she couldn't see the food. And it didn't matter how many times we told her the food was in front of her, she couldn't see it. And if she couldn't see it, it meant it wasn't there no matter what we told her. So that was very challenging.
So from an Alzheimer's perspective, it's better to separate the food with a little bit of space around it, so there's a contrast between the plate color and the food color, that somebody, instead of seeing a big brown mess there that they can't comprehend what's there, now they can see, okay, that looks like it might be green beans or mashed potatoes. At least they can see it, and the food registers in the brain.
And And sometimes when they get farther along, it's better to serve it in courses because it's easier for them to perceive it and eat it if there's enough area around it for them to focus on it.
Okay, so the eating and drinking, the bright red or blue plates and cups,
Hmm.
uh, smaller portions separated by a visible
Hmm.
plate background. The color of the cup can help with the hydration.
Hmm.
Anything else? Before we go that far, I wanted to, if somebody has diabetes, and then it made me think, well, a lot of times they may have cardiovascular disease, they may have some other problem that might be compounded, not necessarily from a medical perspective, but from a treatment perspective of Alzheimer's and diabetes and obesity and cardiac issues. You have medical drugs that are going in there that may create a problem. So, how well versed were you on the meds going in and the side effects and any interactions between the drugs?
Well, I was very fortunate in that my college roommate was a medical practitioner, and her specialty was diabetes. So, and since almost everyone in my family, except for my mom, had diabetes that I cared for, it became very, very necessary for me to consult with her. And the first thing that happened is when I mentioned that my dad went from facility to facility to facility, they piled on drugs to make him compliant and added new ones, but they never took him off the ones that weren't working. And the only thing they ever took him off of was because it ended up landing him in the ER was Aricept because it was making him so ill he refused to eat and he was just shutting down. So when we got him out, my friend suggested that I go into our pharmacist, take his medication list, and get a drug interaction check. We took him off of 22 medications out of 38 that they had piled on him. So he had 14 left that were to deal with what was left over. So heart meds, several different diabetic injections because he had long-acting and short-acting insulin. He also, I'm trying to remember all the, it's been a number of years now, but he had several different medications he was taking. So we got him down to 14, and it was like we had given him Miracle Grow. A lot of times we'll find out people that go into palliative care and hospice because then they discontinue all medications, they suddenly spring back to life and then they get discharged. It's because nobody ever did a drug interaction check. And I guarantee you, your pharmacist would be more thrilled to do a drug interaction check than they are every day filling 9,000 prescriptions.
Yeah. One of the things I talk about a lot on the show Talking Heads, which I'll be doing next year in about 30 minutes or so, is okay, fine, you have your doctor, you got your meds. Sometimes the best person to talk to is the pharmacist
Hmm.
uh, because as a joke, I go in there, I'm on a couple of meds, and I say, "Oh, can I drink and drive with this?" And yeah, they'll say, "Stand by one, let me go ask the pharmacist." And I rarely get a pharmacist to come back out and joke with me about it. Or most of the time, I say, "Yeah, no problem." It's just like they hear you, but they don't hear you.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things that it's a serious thing. You're adding something to the body that's creating side effects.
Hmm.
There's something there that caused the problem, the side effect that the symptom that you're seeing, that generally can be addressed by something in nature, but you either don't know it, like aspirin. You mentioned that earlier. You know, the white bark of the whatever tree. Uh, that salicylic acid, doesn't have the same side effects as aspirin, but it's what that was there 200 years ago and beyond that. So
Hmm.
you have things there that can work, but our doctors are not trained for the nutritional aspect of it. And in most cases, the pharmacists aren't either. Uh, so we have issues there, but I really love the part that you say a drug interaction test. Is that what that is called?
Check. Drug interaction check.
Check. Okay. Any other words of wisdom? Because that one is truly a major word of wisdom right there.
That well, I have to say that was probably the most life-changing for me was having the drug interaction check. The second one was again my friend who was the worked in medicine, sitting down with me and explaining how long-acting and short-acting insulin worked for those of you that are doing diabetes, and where the body's natural insulin production if the pancreas isn't too damaged, where that goes also because it was very eye-opening to me to know when to expect a low naturally versus when to expect a low if we missed a meal. So it helped me to gauge and then create. Actually, this is the best part for me. I was able to create forms for my family to say, okay, if he's having this problem, you do this step. If he's having this problem, you do this step. It gave me the ability to create respite kits where I could send him out with his little kit. They could take him. They had all the instructions. We went through it before they left, and it said how much insulin for whatever his blood sugar was reading, or when he would need a snack, or all these things to prevent them from having to deal with him having a low blood sugar, having a hallucination because he's too high or too low, or something like that. Because if I can do something where I can get some downtime, I'm darn well gonna do it. And then he also gets to socialize, or your loved one gets to socialize more because then they're out in a safe environment where they've got somebody that understands what's happening and can help them through it.
You mentioned something there very, very critical: self-care.
Mhm.
Just because you're taking care of somebody else doesn't mean that you don't need some level of self-care yourself. My wife was going through chemo, and I had a couple of days where I could go work out in the pool and get it cleaned up from all the stuff that was going on. And that is one thing I came down with the, what do you call it, shingles, because I was
Oh,
out there, and I'm out there, I'm getting sunburned, I'm stressed, I haven't been eating, I haven't been diet, I haven't been exercising, and I get to the doctor's office. I was fortunate to get in just literally in a couple 3 days, and he walks in, looks at me, and says, "Yeah, it looks like a traditional or typical case of shingles to me." And all of a sudden, click, 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 click. Yeah, I'm counting off each one of the things that I know that causes that herpes virus to react. And yeah, and so I went on the regimen, and literally about 4 or 5 days, everything started disappearing. After 7 days it was gone. I still had 7 days worth of stuff to take, but self-care is so important because we forget, we get so emotionally tied up
mhm.
with the person that we're dealing with. We get tired, we get fatigued, we just don't think right. It's almost like you have to have it on the schedule. Call somebody, I need 2 hours to myself, whether I go to the library, gym, walk around, doesn't matter. You need to get that on your schedule as importantly as you're doing anything else with the loved one. So we're getting down to the last couple minutes of the show, and you do a lot of things, Tracy, to help other people. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And what value can you offer people? Who's a good client for you? How do they get in touch with you? How do they get your book? So please let our audience know.
Well, Red, thank you very much for the opportunity. First of all, this is my passion project. I do not do this for a living. However, I am very eager to help people who need the help. And my book itself is me in like you have a coffee klatch with me where you can sit down and you can get everything out of my brain. The book itself is designed so that you can run your fingers down the table of contents, find the challenge of the day, turn to that page, and there are step-by-step instructions with some illustration of how to take care of certain things. It covers everything from diagnosis to beyond death because we don't always think about how we grieve before the person actually passes. We don't always think about we need to give ourselves respite care. We don't necessarily think that we need to put a timer on our phone just to breathe. I found that I had to do that 5 times a day just to do some breathing exercises just to keep myself going because you get so stressed out and so tense. But I also want to point out that my website has over 140 resources, curated resources on my resources page at tracycramperkins.com resources. You will find everything from adaptive clothing to supportive services to wandering prevention, eh, anything dementia related, including legal, pharmaceutical, what to do after someone passes. It's all there so that you don't have to struggle to find it. It's also, there's about 130 of these listed in the book itself. I also give out a monthly newsletter. If you sign up for the newsletter, you get 10 steps to calming aggressive dementia behavior. It's based on the teachings of Teepa Snow, and it'll teach you how not to trigger someone into an outburst. A lot of times we don't realize, and I learned this the hard way, that 75% of the things that we do are causing the problems. And if we could reduce those by understanding what's happening, we have very few outbursts. So it walks you back to calm. And then I also on my website under useful forms have the meltdown trigger list. What that does is it teaches you what to look for and how to find the things that make your loved one melt down, especially if they're sundowning. You record the time of the day, what's happening around them, the temperature. If you record it several days in a row, you'll start to see a pattern of what's happening. A lot of times it's because they don't understand that there's something that they need to do. So when you record that, there's also a space at the bottom because I am a big proponent of respite care, and you put down the things that work to redirect your loved one so that anybody can come in and give you a couple hours downtime. If some behavior starts happening, they can look down and say, oh, I need to change the room that they're in, or I need to wrap them in the blanket and offer them a warm beverage, or I need to give them a stuffed toy to play with or play soft music. Whatever it is, that's the thing you want to use.
Tracy, it's been just a lovely time with you. A lot of information. I'm sure there's probably several topics we didn't even get into that are super critical, and I'd love to have you come back and we can explore some of those at a later time. But again, thank you so very much for being a guest on the show today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead. We're just about here at the end of the show. So, Tracy, look forward to seeing you again. Love your smile. I love the information that you put out. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Red.
And red O'Laughlin here on the Wise Ones. We're closing off for today in about 18 minutes. It looks like rough order of magnitude. My next show comes on Talking Heads. I've been on a program of STEP, STEP, not what you're thinking about with regard to science and technology and engineering and manufacturing, but more of a stress, toxins, emotions, and mental. And today I'm concluding the section on toxins. Next week, we're going to pick up emotions and how you can use these issues to improve your health and make your later life a lot more enjoyable. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye now.